Hi, I'm Dr. Frida Wiley, and today we're going to be reviewing the Ohio State Board of Pharmacy Law. During this program, we're going to be reviewing and discussing key concepts in Ohio State Board of Pharmacy Law, and during this process, I'll be providing you with some helpful tips to help guide you through a logical thought process with regards to the law to help you prepare for it, and then to also feel confident enough to execute these concepts when you're practicing as a pharmacist, which is the ultimate goal, right? I also want to point out that during this process of trying to create an interactive program, we'll be engaging in some scenarios where I'll give you a few scenarios or sort of case studies essentially to think about, or situations. And the purpose of that is to kind of get you thinking, okay, well, how would I approach the situation knowing the concepts of the law? And what would be lawful and what would be sort of a judgment thing? And I know for me, as I was sitting for my boards, that was a big part of it. Part of it is the law, and part of it, not all of the answers are cut and dry on the MPJE. So this is designed to kind of help get you thinking along those lines. And throughout this process as well, we'll be having a few quizzes or review sessions, review questions to kind of help you rehearse some of these concepts and become more familiar with them and set you up for success so you feel very well prepared for your boards. The objectives. So as I mentioned earlier, I want to encourage some critical thinking skills with regards to applying the law. And during this program, I will be providing an overview of basic pharmacy practice as it applies to the Ohio State law. And that will include dispensing practices, requirements for licensure, renewal, pharmacy law updates, and those are really important. And depending on when you're taking your boards, I'd like to point out that it's important to review the Ohio State Board of Pharmacy website to see if there are any updates that may have come out, within a few months of you taking your board, because sometimes those will be reflected on the exam. So pharmacy law updates are very important, but I've provided here in this training session the most recent ones for you that will be current and pertinent to preparing for the exam. And additionally, we'll be discussing the Ohio Controlled Substances Act. Now, some of the information that will be discussed will overlap with the federal law, but we'll be sure to emphasize the law as it pertains to Ohio. So I would like to point that out as well. And here are a few helpful hints with regards to preparing for the boards. Some of these things are things that I started to figure out as I was preparing, but it's never harmful to throw it out there so you can kind of keep it in mind. Remember that with pharmacy law, whether it be federal law or state law, it's always a numbers game. You're going to see a lot of numbers, and yes, unfortunately, it's a good idea to try to be familiar with all of them. So you'll notice that you have X amount of days to update certain information, especially when it comes to updating your change of address or change of employment, for instance. Maybe it's the pharmacist to pharmacy tech ratio, knowing what those are in different settings. And in certain states, that is very well defined. Also, just knowing numbers in terms of amounts. Excuse me. So, for instance, with pseudoephedrine, you're limited to selling a certain amount per day or a certain amount within a certain time frame. And you need to know what those numbers are, or perhaps it's with regards to keeping documents. So oftentimes with pharmacy law, the storage of certain documents, they have to be stored for X amount of days or X amount of years. How many years would that be? And sometimes the laws are different depending on what the setting is or what certain situations are. Knowing your lists is very important. So in pharmacy law, oftentimes it comes down to lists, even with, for instance, what constitutes being a valid prescription. Pardon my voice, but essentially when you're looking at a prescription, it has to have certain things on it. And this is a very generic example, and it's probably a duh moment, but it's still important to point that out. So, you know, knowing what are the criteria for certain things. Another example, going back to pseudoephedrine, for instance. When you're filling out the pseudoephedrine logbook, there are certain criteria, certain requirements that have to be completed or fulfilled to keep that logbook current and to keep it accurately and in compliance with the law. So what are those, right? So that's just an example. Knowing your exceptions. So exceptions are often big stinkers on exams in general, right? So pharmacy law is no exception. For instance, if you are going to fill a prescription for a controlled substance, specifically a Schedule II controlled substance, then in most cases, you can only fill it one time. However, under Ohio State pharmacy law, there are certain situations where you can actually fill a controlled substance that is Schedule II and have partial fills and do several partial fills. So you need to know, what are the circumstances? Can I do that in community practice? Can I do that in an LTC setting? Can I do that in hospital? Where can I do that? And what are the circumstances that apply that would allow me to do that? So that's very important. And then, of course, just being able to understand general procedures and pharmacy practice. Just simple enough. So that part is pretty straightforward. Lots of memorization, but also being able to work with that information. And that's what we're hoping to achieve with this program today.